We are already in the midst of James Gunn's DCU reboot, and we here at the Lapsed Geek Podcast thought we'd look back at the top 10 reasons why the DCEU failed. Was it casting or competition, or were they just simply bad movies? I am Doc John, and let's jump right in and find out. Number 10. The over-reliance on CGI. The least problematic issue on this list, it's safe to say that when one sets out to make a superhero film, that CGI will be an integral part of the production. Even street-level heroes such as Daredevil and the Punisher are no strangers to computer imagery, so how much more so for characters like Wonder Woman and Superman? The problem with the DCEU was the predictable nature with which they used special effects, like Marvel's overuse of the third act light beam into the sky. It seemed as if every DCEU film ended inside a computer. The Justice League famously, or maybe infamously, ended on a barren, lifeless CGI landscape against an equally lifeless foe. Steppenwolf did nothing to convince us that he was a villain worthy of the Justice League or worthy of our attention. Compare this to Ares and Wonder Woman, and we see the exact same problem. Wonder Woman was easily the best film in the DCEU and did a great job of remaining grounded in the gritty, harsh reality that was World War I Europe, asking the questions of whether humanity's nature creates war or if they were being manipulated by a god. And then suddenly we're transported inside the Matrix for a final battle with a CGI Ares that not only destroys the ambiguity set up by the film, but also gives us a generic computer villain with little to no stakes. And we're barely going to even mention the effects in The Flash. From microwave babies, the Nicolas Cage and Christopher Reeve's Superman, and the Speed Force effects that made the movie a joke even before its release. Number 9. The casting. This is always a difficult topic, because is it enough to simply choose an actor that resembles the character on the page? Or can one take chances with an actor they believe can elevate a role or bring something unexpected to a performance? Heath Ledger found something in his performance of the Joker that we would argue was transcendent, and I have to admit here that I did not necessarily believe in Heath Ledger when he was first announced in the casting. On the other hand, was it George Clooney that doomed Batman and Robin? Or was it the writing? It was the writing, 100% the writing. Certainly there were no complaints with an actor like Henry Cavill as Superman, Margot Robbie as Harleen Quinzel, or Will Smith as Deadshot. But Jason Momoa as Aquaman was certainly a risk, as he neither looked like the character as he was traditionally represented, nor did he particularly act like comic book Aquaman. We'd argue this was a successful risk, and that Aquaman is a niche enough character to take that chance with. Casting Jared Leto as the Joker, however, was an unmitigated disaster that had effects far beyond Suicide Squad. It made fans question whether the filmmakers even understood the characters they were making movies about, which is not the reaction you ever want. This happened again with Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. Worse yet, these are villain pillars in the DC universe. Even casuals know who the Joker and Lex Luthor are, and many of them were left scratching their heads at the DCEU versions. It was possible to overcome these casting errors, but they certainly made the ice skating uphill, as our favorite Daywalker would say. Number 8. Shared universe fatigue. This one is not so much the fault of the DCEU as one of timing and the finicky nature of the audience. After the bulldozer that was the MCU and the multi-billion-dollar juggernaut that was the Avengers, every film company on the planet wanted a shared universe and a piece of the Marvel pie. A Universal Monsters shared universe was planned that managed to make one disastrous film with the Tom Cruise The Mummy reboot before closing its doors. Godzilla and Kong teamed up for the marginally successful Monsterverse, and even Lego attempted a shared universe with its various properties including Batman and Ninjago. The problem with following a formula is that by its very nature, you're automatically late to the party and always playing catch-up, which forced the DCEU to make missteps which we'll discuss later. Hollywood is all about perception, and if you're not first, you're last. Suddenly, every major studio was promising a shared universe to cash in, and audience fatigue set in almost immediately with every franchise not attached to Marvel. Number 7. The drama. Not something unique to WB or the DCEU, making a film appears to entail as much drama behind the camera as it does in front of the camera. Marvel was not immune to this, of course. The Incredible Hulk famously had infighting between the studio and Edward Norton, its star, over the vision and the final cut of the movie. This led to Norton walking away from Marvel and Marvel casting Mark Ruffalo to play Bruce Banner moving forward. Edgar Wright also walked away from Ant-Man due to creative differences. Perhaps the difference is that Marvel managed to maintain a consistent vision despite their shakeups. The DCEU appeared to constantly suffer drama from its productions, but unlike Marvel, the behind-the-scenes drama was reflected in the final product. The Rock's power play to revolve the DCEU around himself hurt Shazam, Fury of the Gods, as he is the main character's nemesis, and he refused to even make a cameo. Taking Suicide Squad away from Hader, taking Justice League away from Snyder, and installing Joss Whedon, who then went on to have friction with both Gal Gadot and Ray Fisher. Then spending tens of millions to bring Snyder back to recut his own Justice League movie that was ostensibly for a streaming service. So, which movie is canon? Do they care? And if they don't, why should we? Number 6. The MCU. This leads us to one of the major reasons the DCEU failed. The MCU itself. And it's not because there isn't enough room to have a Superman film and an Avengers movie in a calendar month. DC and Marvel are two fundamentally different approaches to comic book heroes. Marvel has generally attempted to ground its universe in realism despite its fantastical nature. DC, on the other hand, has usually embraced an almost godlike stature to their characters, with Superman able to move entire planets, the Flash able to run speeds approaching the speed of light, and Green Lantern wielding the strongest weapon in the universe and able to make any thought a construct. But rather than embrace these differences, WB always appeared to be looking over at its competitors' test paper to copy what they were doing. Oh, Guardians of the Galaxy just made $1 billion and it had a cool soundtrack. Quick, let's recut Suicide Squad, add some songs and some laughs to completely change the intended tone of the film. That's gotta work, right? Oh no, that Snyder guy is making a dark film again. Let's bring in Joss Whedon's polar opposite to finish his movie by completely changing the tone and structure. Audiences can see through these changes, and while they may create short-term success, the overall perception is that you don't believe in your own work or your own characters, and you'd rather be making a Marvel movie. Number 5. Lack of character development. We're struggling to think of a DCEU character that showed any true character development through the 16 movies in this series. Superman was a brooding, melancholy man-god in Man of Steel and stayed that way throughout. Gal Gadot is Gal Gadot, and you can't really ask for more than that. We're going to give Batman the ability to work with a team as growth, so there's one. Flash seemingly grew as a character because we all agree that his younger self was even more insufferable than he was, and we think Shazam may have developed schizophrenia between the two movies because whatever character Billy Batson was playing was clearly not the same character that Zachary Levi was playing to portray Captain Marvel. And The Rock wasn't even playing Black Adam, but himself, so there's nothing there. But overall, these movies use their characters as archetypes, rather than write them as real people that grow and evolve. Number 4. The periphery. Audiences are more willing than ever to accept a multiverse of characters, where a TV universe or an animated one can be different from a cinematic one. Marvel had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, and the Netflixverse, but they were able to keep these properties relatively isolated from the MCU. Some might argue that the tighter continuity that has occurred with the Disney Plus shows, making them required viewing for some movies, has fractured the audience in recent years, and led to the decline of the MCU as a whole. As problematic as Disney Plus may be for the MCU, it's nothing compared to DC's issues. Setting aside the animated fare because DC has always had a strong animation department separate from its live-action counterparts, there was the entire Arrowverse with its own multiverse, including its own Superman. It was even acknowledged by the DCEU when Ezra Miller appeared with Grant Gustin's Flash during their Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover. There were other shows such as Gotham that had its own Bruce Wayne that existed entirely in its own universe. The Titans existed in another universe with its own Batman. There was the Joaquin Phoenix Joker and the Robert Pattinson Batman, neither of which were related to the DCEU or to each other. People were left to wonder, why would we get a Pattinson Batman instead of an Affleck one? And if the Affleck Batman isn't important, then why care about the shared universe at all? Number 3. The cohesiveness, or the lack thereof. We've mentioned the peripheral properties that DC developed outside of the DCEU, but another huge problem was that oftentimes movies within the DCEU felt completely disconnected from the perceived main narrative. Even when Marvel was in Phase 1 building for the Avengers, there were threads being planted to connect the characters to a larger narrative. Captain America, the First Avenger, introduced us to the Cosmic Cube, which would later be revealed to be an Infinity Stone. The Guardians of the Galaxy, the one Marvel property with the most tenuous connection to the rest of the universe, was still tied to the larger narrative due to the Infinity Stones. When we look at the DCEU, any film not helmed at some point by Zack Snyder feels as if it's in a different universe. Suicide Squad, the first one, is most tonally and story-wise consistent property with Snyder's vision, despite the studio interference. Wonder Woman barely had a connection to the League, which was baffling. Why not use one of Darkseid's minions as the main antagonist in the film, or have Ares work with Darkseid against his own pantheon in order to make the narrative more cohesive? Shazam and Shazam Fury of the Gods, both in tone and story, had no connection either, despite a shoehorned Superman cameo. This would be like saying that Spider-Man was part of the DCEU because Aunt May made a Superman joke in Spider-Man 2. Aquaman, Birds of Prey, Black Adam, and Blue Beetle all make the same mistakes. It's not enough to say you're part of a cinematic universe or to have a random cameo when the events in that universe don't seem to impact any other characters. Not every MCU film was part of the Infinity Gauntlet saga, but if you look at Tony Stark in the film's past Avengers, he's a man suffering from PTSD as the result of his near-death experience. He changes and he's affected by the films that came previously, and that's how you build a cohesive viewer experience. Number 2, the planning, or lack thereof. The planning that went to the MCU was nothing short of mind-blowing. To construct Phase 1 with individual films that led to an Avengers movie is an accomplishment we now take for granted. Marvel could have easily started with an Avengers film, put the biggest characters it owned the rights to in one gigantic film in an attempt to draw audiences. But instead they earned the fans' respect and dollars by building their universe piece by piece and took 22 films before having Captain America utter "Avengers Assemble," a line I almost couldn't hear in the theaters because the crowd was so raucous by that point. In response to Marvel, DC originally planned to build its shared universe off the Nolan Batman trilogy, but decided against it as Nolan planned to kill Batman and replace him with Dick Grayson. So they pivoted to basing it on Snyder's Man of Steel, then decided to have Batman fight Superman in the second film, a la The Dark Knight Returns, completely disregarding that their conflict in that book was born out of decades of friendship and disagreements. Then we got a Suicide Squad film and a Wonder Woman film that had nothing to do with the Justice League before making the Justice League. We knew little of the Flash or Aquaman or Cyborg to this point, and much of the audience simply felt that this was unearned. DC wanted to have a gigantic shared universe, but was unwilling to give us the foundation necessary to ensure its success. If the Justice League is your endgame, see what we did? Then build the League. Why would there even be a Suicide Squad to take on superhuman threats when we've seen one active superhuman up to this point? Now, if you've gotten this far and you still haven't, please think about going down there, hitting the like, hitting the subscribe button, and helping the channel grow so we can make more content like this for you. We here at the Lapsed Geek Podcast love making 1-minute comic book reviews. We love doing trailer breakdowns, and we love making tier lists like this. But we want to know that you're out there, so we can't thank you enough for all the love and support you've given us over the last couple months. Keep doing it. Remember, this is a channel made by geeks for geeks and by fans for fans. Thank you so much. Number 1, the shame. There's a reason why DC makes so many Batman movies. Yes, the name is hokey, and yes, the character dresses up as a flying rodent, and yes, his main foe is essentially a normal guy who dresses up as a clown. But he's cool. The dark, tortured character that is Batman, who is driven by horrors from his past, drives cool cars, is a billionaire playboy, knows martial arts, and saves damsels in distress while occasionally beating up Superman, is a male adolescent fantasy that many of us have carried into adulthood. Many of us may want the powers of Superman, but few of us want to be Superman. We don't want to stand up for truth, justice, and the American way, because that's not exactly cool. And that's the way DC feels about its superhero properties. It's the reason why many DC films are promoted as dark, edgy, and gritty, when their heroes are anything but. They're ashamed of their superheroes, and it's obvious to the fans. Get over it, DC. Your heroes are bright, fantastical, and unabashedly heroic, and you need to embrace this on your reboot or face the same fate as the DCEU. We hope you enjoyed this list, and we urge you to subscribe and help us out so we can make you more of these. Thank you so much, and remember, shop smart, shop as smart.